Hi there, I thought I'd do a short video reflection on the scripture readings that are being suggested for churches to read this Sunday. The first reading is from Exodus chapter 3, verse 1 to 15, but it's probably worth having a look at just the first 3 chapters of Exodus, because I'll talk a little bit about that whole section of the story. And the gospel reading is from Matthew chapter 16, verse 21 to 28. So feel free to pause the video and have a read of those and then start the video up again. I'm wondering, when you experience conflict, when you experience a challenge, what is your preferred response? Is it fight or flight or freeze or frown? At the end of last year, my partner and I started doing improvised theatre or improvised comedy classes, Improv. When you're learning improv, you're learning to get up on the stage not knowing what the scene is going to be or what characters the other actors are going to be playing. On Friday nights, sometimes we've been going and doing scenes with an improv coach, and he's been saying that really we should not even know who our character is when we get up. Often I find that we want to have our characters defined so we know how they will respond to other characters on stage. But our coach is saying that we should just choose a response and let that response tell us about who the character is. He says, look, if someone came up to me in the street and punched me in the face, and that's not impossible to imagine when you're a bloke in the city on a Friday night, if someone came up to me and punched me in the face, I don't know how I'd respond. Maybe I'd be a big, strong man and fight them. Maybe I'd run away like a coward. Maybe I'd curl up in a ball and cry like a baby. I wonder about whether the young man Moses could have predicted his reactions. Moses is a young Israelite man. His people have been enslaved and targeted with genocide by the king whose land they inhabit. And thanks to the conspiring of Moses' mother and his big sister, and perhaps the favour of God, he has ended up raised in the royal family as a prince of Egypt, under the roof of the man who tried to have him killed. Moses exists in a world where fathers are important, undisputably. In this world, in a way that may or may not be hard for us to imagine, every household is ruled by a father. In big households, there is an hierarchy of fathers of different generations. And fathers of big households try to dominate the households of other fathers. It's fathers versus fathers. Fathers run the world of this story, and the most powerful father is the king of Egypt, Moses' grandfather by adoption, the man who enslaved his people and tried to wipe him out. If we start the story with today's reading, we might miss the reason that Moses is herding sheep in the wilderness. Moses has rebelled against the systemic violence overseen by his Egyptian grandfather. He sees an Egyptian whipping an Israelite and reacts, killing the Egyptian man and secretly burying the body. He reacts to the systemic violence of the slavery system by murdering one of the slave drivers in the system. He doesn't see that he, as a prince of Egypt, is part of the violent system that enslaves his people as well. He finds out that his own people know what happened and they don't see him as a hero. He sees 2 Israelite men, 2 fellow Israelites fighting, and he intervenes. They aren't impressed. They see him as another Egyptian master who might just as quickly murder them, thinking that there'll be no consequences for him as a prince. His anger has led him to kill someone further down the hierarchy, and the slaves are afraid he'll just as easily treat them in that way too, and he won't think much about it. Moses realizes that people know what he did and he has to get out of town before his grandfather, the king, finds him. Because once again, the king, his adoptive grandfather, wants to kill him. He runs to the household of another father, a wilderness father, a shepherd father, Reuel, or Jethro, the priest of Midian. Moses marries Zipporah, the daughter of Jethro, and he becomes a father himself within this household of Midian. As part of a wilderness household, Moses has to learn to care for sheep and to be attentive to country. And as he's doing this, way out in the remote places, as far from civilization as possible, and at the top of a mountain, extremes of distance and altitude, Moses encounters God. Moses encounters God while he's at work herding sheep. I wonder how often we might notice God's presence in our everyday life, in the home, at work, around the neighborhood. In the dominant society around us, we don't have as much of a sense that the world is enchanted anymore. So we may not be looking out for divine presence. We might already be able to sense the presence of the divine in our everyday life, but we might also need to take opportunities that we can take to get out of the patterns that enslave and inbox us, that try to keep us moving within the grids and the hierarchies of our society. Moses sees something that he can't fathom or master, and he doesn't react. Instead, he turns aside and investigates. He takes off his shoes. Hush. It implies awe and reverence. Taking off shoes means that we can feel the earth beneath our feet, recognizing that we've come from and are sustained by the earth. We're part of it. We're not separate minds or spirits that are just floating above it. We're not disembodied masters of the natural world. Maybe Moses has learned this kind of thing from Zipporah and Jethro and the family. God speaks from the bush that flames but isn't burnt up and erased. This is a power that doesn't consume and destroy. Eternally renewable. It demands awe because it makes no sense. Moses has to take off his shoes in humility. And Moses tries to ask for a name, but God won't be pinned down. Fluid and wild and dynamic like a flame. God says something like, I am who I am, or I will be who I will be, or maybe I am who I'm becoming. God identifies as the God that Moses' fathers knew, fathers who were sojourners, always on the move. But that doesn't mean that Moses can predict what God will do now. Anything could happen. God recognizes Moses' passion for justice, the passion that led him to kill. God promises to free the Israelites from slavery, but God's plan involves sending Moses back to the land where he's known as a murderer, where Israelites are slaves. In today's gospel reading, Peter has just named Jesus as the Messiah. And in response to this, Jesus has named Peter as the rock that will provide the foundation for an eternal church. And the conversation continues on with Peter trying to pin down the kind of Messiah that Jesus is. Peter reacts with passion when Jesus says that he'll be crucified. And Peter says, you can't suffer and die. It's not possible. It'd be a source of shame to die on a cross. It wouldn't be strong to die on a cross. It wouldn't be honourable to die on a cross. The thinking is that it's better to kill another man than allow him to kill you. But Jesus says to Peter, don't you dare try to define me. Don't try to restrain me. Don't try to fit me into the structure of your church, Peter. I'm not suddenly an object under the roof of your house. Jesus says his followers need to be willing to take up suffering and death. Jesus is talking about self-denial, self-control. And I think self-denial, it's got a bad rap. Many folks have grown up being raised to deny our desires and our needs to the point that we might not even be able to get in touch with what we want or need. We need to be able to articulate our needs and our desires. if we're going to be able to make conscious choices about what we'll do with them. We need to be able to know and articulate what we want, and sometimes we'll be called to lay it down for the sake of following Jesus. Like the flaming bush that's not burned up, Jesus absorbs violence and death and overcomes it. By paradox, he says that if we surrender our lives, we'll find life.